Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the HR committee meeting to order on April 6th. And it is about 4:29, a minute early. Noting that all the committee members are here, I need approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any public comments from anybody? Thank you. So first item is to review staffing and compensation levels compared to peer districts. I truly appreciate what you sent us, Brian. That was great.
Well, it's actually, this is really thanks to Forecast 5. And so this really is a series of visuals that I pulled out of there. And so I'll give Steve credit because I think he was the first to discover Forecast 5 and kind of pulled it over to all of us. So it's obviously a tremendously powerful tool, a lot of information there. You know, I think this kind of goes to some of the questions that you know, this committee and the budget committee, who I know a couple of you are involved in as well, are very interested in. What I've put together is a comparison of our district to what we consider to be kind of our peer districts here in Dane County. And it's gotta roll it. Oh, roll it. There we go. And so kind of highlight just, I think you've all seen this number before, these numbers before. If nothing else, you saw maybe a few of them when you first came onto the board. You know, Judy and Brian, I think I shared something that looked like this with you. Joan and Mark, I would guess that Connie had shared something with you guys back when you had started. And this number is ever changing and typically ever kind of growing. And so this is obviously a snapshot of where we are and who we employ. You know, and a couple of reminders in the bottom two items is that, you know, these 604 are what we consider to be kind of regular employees. It does not include really all of our co-curricular staff, because again, about another 100, we'd add that to that list by about another 100 that are not regular staff members. And then if we are thinking about summer school, you know, that's another 200 positions, some of which overlap with our regular employees, some of which do not. But again, this is typical school year employees and regular employees. You know, we talk about comparable districts. You know, we're obviously kind of talking about the Madison suburb districts. You know, which vary in size certainly, and it certainly vary in student demographics. But they are, in terms of kind of a general environment, academically very similar to us, and certainly the districts that we most closely collaborate with as we're, you know, going through the school year. Notice it does not include the city of Madison. It, you know, kind of its own unique school district as well, and just the tremendous size difference and demographic difference. We don't typically include those in our comparisons.
Brian, do you know how many students McFarland has in their virtual program?
That is a great question, and actually beat me to the punch. I would say I don't know the answer to that exact question, but it certainly has an effect on many of the numbers that you'll see related to McFarland. And so I'm not sure, Steve, if you or Randy know that number.
I think it's almost half of that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're much smaller than us.
Yeah,
I thought they were smaller, and
they're like 2,500. I don't think they're 3,000 students. The rest are all virtual.
No.
The virtual come from all over.
Yeah, they have a virtual charter, so they're pulling from all over.
Brian, so percent of the composite income, is that what that?
So the definition of low income students would that would be their student population of their
Oh, I
district.
got, okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry.
And so, for example, our district,
We're,
oh, I'm so excited to use this pointer that I confiscated years ago in the high school.
And it doesn't work.
And it does, yeah, the battery's going dead. I'll have to see if Mr. Browski can gather me a new one.
no, it's totally fair enough.
Yeah. So,
That's like your free and reduced lunch numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So for McFarland, that 34%, we include all of the virtual students in that number. That's, yeah, that's
I think the
interesting.
state average is over 45%.
Wow.
So we are
Really an
unique.
anomaly,
We are really an
Yeah.
island of.
outlier.
and then as we kind of look at higher level information about, staffing, our operating budget, our current level of expenditure related to personnel is about 72.29%. Which again, compared to our peer districts is a little bit above average, excuse me. But do note that McFarland, theirs is significantly less. That also reflects that virtual school. That will really change, change the average, obviously, but it significantly affects their information. A little bit about, just, general staffing information for teachers first. We have, remained fairly consistent in terms of our student to teacher ratios in the district. We did, have our ratio decrease, so obviously more staff to students. That went down slightly for us in 2020. And as you know, we have generally, except for 2018 to 2019, been increasing our teaching staff as our enrollment increases.
Brian, when you calculate this number, feed in this data, it's student-teacher ratio, so that doesn't include any administrators or paras,
This particular visual is only teaching staff.
only teaching. Thank you.
And this, I guess maybe you take it one step back. All of this data is actually what we as a district have to provide to the DPI on what's called the 1202 report annually. And then Forecast 5 takes that data from the whole state and visualizes it for us. And so, we submit every district submits raw data. Forecast 5 is what provides us the ability to view it.
And then how do you explain the difference between this ratio and the class sizes?
Well, teaching staff would also include specialists. So, your instructional coaches, folks that would not have classrooms or of students that they're responsible, but they're considered to be teachers. They would be within that group, which would obviously
Doesn't include the paraeducators?
does not include paraeducators.
But would it include librarians,
Yep.
guidance,
Yep,
all of the specials within a building?
yes.
IT staff and some
Uh,
probably. Your
your tech integrators.
Right, okay,
Yes, like your tech assistants, no.
thank you.
And then as we start to look at staffing levels, this is in terms of full-time staff, another visual as you look at different districts. For example, what again, pointing out that McFarland's number is higher than everyone else because again, the virtual sections that they have. A little bit about, I think, Mark, you would ask this question about just, I think, teacher and staff demographics. You know, as we start to look at race, you know, this starts to show some of the differences that we have, and I apologize that this one, I don't know why this one chose not to come through in color, but it starts to show some of the differences that we have in terms of our student makeup and our staff makeup. You know, and obviously our largest of each of the demographic groups would be Caucasian. And we so the gap is we have 10% more Caucasian staff than we do students. And then here you start to see negative gaps. That means that your students, you know, your students of those different races or demographics would be more, we would have more of them than we have of staff of that same demographic. This visual kind of relates to teacher compensation. Every one of these squares, and I think this is not a new visual to the group, but every one of these squares is an individual teacher in Dane County in these comparable districts. And what this lower line is this is the best fit average line of their wage at different years of experience that go along the bottom. What's highlighted here, these are pink or red, are Waunakee teachers. So each one of these is an individual Waunakee teacher. And by highlighting them, what that shows is in general, our teachers are paid in any given year of experience a slightly higher average wage than the other Dane County districts. Now, again, average, in some are not, and some are. All these all these individuals that are below either line mean that they're being paid below the average for their year of experience compared to either their district peers or their Dane County peers. And these particular individuals are one of the topics that we're talking about at the Teacher Compensation Committee. You know, because there are different ways people can get there, but some of the ways that some folks got there were by placement decisions that we made as a district when we were trying to control costs. We underpaid or offered lower than what they would typically be making compared to a district or out of district peer for individuals that we were offering to hire.
Brian, do you mind if I jump in for a minute?
Come on in.
So committee members, this is something we've tracked for multiple years now. So for those of you who remember the meeting we had with staff, the budget really planning meeting last spring, we had the same slide that we shared with the teacher leaders who were at that meeting, but showed several years worth of data. So obviously this is the most recent year of data, but it's really interesting to track over time to really ask questions like, are our averages getting better? Are we below average, above average? How has it changed from 3 years ago? And we are in a much better situation today than we were if you go back and look at this exact same data from 3 or 4 years ago. So if there's a particular, set of data that interests you, Brian or I can go back and show you 3 to 5 years worth of that exact same data. So like Brian could take this exact slide and run it for last year and the year before and the year before that, which gives you a really strong sense of longitudinal data to show how does that change over time, and is our position relative to our peers looking better today than it did 3 years ago? Does it look the same? Does it look worse? And we can run that for anything that you might be interested in. So if something catches your eye in this presentation from Brian, that you're thinking, I wish I could know how that's changed in the last 3 to 4 years, we can very easily get that to you. That's all a part of what we pay for with the Forecast 5 data. And we're happy to get you the data that you would want to see. And obviously Brian went very in depth with 30 slides here, and he could have probably made it 90 slides if it was, 2 and 3 years worth of data. But if there's something you want, we can get that to you. And even this slide, we've got this same slide that we've shared before in prior years. And it's really impactful to see the changes over time and what has really taken place. So I just wanted to jump in and share that we've got prior years information as well, and we can share whatever it is that you might be looking for any of these slides if you want to go deeper. Thanks, Brian.
Is the dark line the best fit line for our district?
Yes, just our district.
Yeah.
It's, the gray line would be, the gray line below it is the best fit line for the county.
Okay,
The black line is the best fit line for our district.
so they really run parallel.
They do, which speaks to
Yeah.
part of our goal is to
Yeah.
try to be very comparable, very competitive to our,
Because I don't think they have in the past run that parallel.
I would, well, what I can't speak to that. What I would say is that what Steve was saying is that you could certainly track over years that our line has gone from below
Right,
to
right,
above.
right.
So we have made, as Steve is really saying, we've made a difference in how we do compared to our peers.
I think what you're remembering, Joan, is we were relatively competitive on the left-hand side,
Yes,
and we dipped
And
below the
then-
line as we
yeah.
had more experience.
yeah.
Mhm.
Now we've brought that up over the last number of years.
And again, this particular visual is initially very powerful, but then there's obviously a little bit of information that builds it. In that, as you compare our average teacher salary to our peer districts, we have the highest average salary. But again, we're fairly close. We're talking approximately 57,000, I think, versus the county average of 53. There it is, actually 57,364. Okay, but what will lead into that is this next slide, which is talking about who are our teaching staff. And what you see here is that we have a very experienced teaching staff. The majority of our teaching staff have, again, more than 10 years of teaching experience, which would indicate that the more someone or the longer someone is taught, the higher their wages will be. And so as we compare ourselves to our peers, they would not have an experience histogram that looks like this. They would have a histogram that would be maybe more balanced, or even in some districts, perhaps front-loaded, as folks with less experience are more common than those with more experience.
So that's an interesting picture because you look at why are we more experienced, and it tells me that people are staying versus leaving. So even with some of the discontent about some of the salary issues, there's got to be enough here that has given the cultural satisfaction to the staff overall to have that kind of a significant, unless teachers just aren't moving across the state, but it seems.
Well, then what I say is Forecast 5 doesn't really have a visual that you can compare retention
Right.
rates to other districts. But there is definitely an aspect of retention. And the other part is hiring, in that experienced teachers tend to be the ones that we are hiring as a district, which also speaks to culture and desirable characteristics, right? I mean, if you're an experienced teacher, you know other districts, you know what teaching is as a profession, you can start to target where you want to be and what experience you want
Right,
to have.
right.
And we certainly get that as well. But, you know, as I think, you know, the majority, the thing that's very unique here is right now, not the greatest number of staff that we have, over 20% of our staff are 20 to 30-year veterans, which is, you know, there's a lot of benefit to that, to your students, when you have folks that have been in the profession and are stable as we have been.
I think one of the pieces, as you start thinking back to the new staff we bring in, we certainly hire some new teachers, but it's drastically the minority of our new hires that are falling in that 1 to 2, 3 years. Many of them are 5+.
Now, as we start to go into some of the hourly positions, you know, actually, Steve had talked a little bit about, you know, historical trend data. Some of the information that is here will have that right within the visual. But I think there's also going to be some powerful visuals that speak to what we've had conversation about the need for us to continue to address, you know, the wages that we offer. But before we are fully lost in that, I also want us to recognize that there's some victory within that, in that we have made over time positive differences in how we compare to our peers. We're not done, but we've been moving the correct direction, but we certainly have more that we need. The first group to focus on custodial maintenance. And so just to kind of share with you a little bit of what we got. Obviously, we've got the historical trend data, years on the left here, hourly wage on the bottom. Each of these dots is a district, is one of those peer districts. This red band is the median wage. And then what I did and this is just by hand, so I had to, you know, do it that way, is to identify which of the dots is us. I put that box around it. And so as we're looking at this particular one, which is custodian on top, head custodian on the bottom, you can see that in terms of custodial wage, we are the lowest paying of the districts, of the county districts. But what you can also see in that we have, over the course of time, moved that, well, this particular, what you'll see here, this, like, for example, this reflects the fact that several districts really made a significant investment into their custodial groups, really moved that median wage. We lagged, we closed a little bit. You know, and then again, you can start to see within the head custodial roles, we tend to, again, hug that a little bit closer to the median wage. And what those are, you know, our average hourly wage and the median wage. So average would mean we have more than one person doing that role. We can produce an average, or if you have only one, obviously the average is super easy for to cut it. But so there is, again, some example of where we're at in the head custodial group. This particular visual, if you employ more than one person in a category, obviously you can start to get a sense of the range of wages that you offer. And so if we're looking here at the custodial band, what this would indicate to you, this is not directly correlated to our wage scale, but it means that right now, you know, we have a custodian, well, that does correspond to our wage scale. Our starting custodial wage scale 1551, except for Oregon, which this would be an example of data that I'd want to dig a little deeper into. With the exception of them, we have the lowest starting wage in the county. You talk about the maximum rate, again, 2234, you're starting to see that we're tending to be kind of with peers, but lagging a little bit behind the average. But that has been affected by Monona Grove and Cross Plains, as they have, you know, a significantly higher top end than we do. You know, and as you look at head custodians, again, similar, you can start to see that we have a lower starting wage. Our average max, we are actually right on the average or very close to it. 25.58, and we're actually a little bit above that at 25.83. And so kind of gives you a sense of the range of how you're paying folks. As we look at the maintenance group, couple good things to mention here. Again, you see a little bit of where we're at in terms of the maintenance group. And then this is how we do in the trades area. There are not a lot of comparisons there. In the county, only 3 districts tend to employ trades. So, you know, can be a bit of a weakness as you're looking for comparables. There are not a lot out there. But we tend and have positioned ourselves, you know, pretty much splitting the median on that one. Okay, is now we kind of, this just shows a little bit of that wage range. You know, this gives a sense of how things really vary. What you run into with some of these districts that don't have, you know, have a very small band is that they either don't employ many folks, or they tend to pay them all very, you know, either the same rate or very similarly. As we look at the classified staff, largest two groups in that of paraeducators, regular and special. You can start to see some of our challenges in this area as well in terms of wage range, and where we would stand compared to some of those other districts. I think this would be one area that I would point out as one of our successes. Is that if you look at our special ed paraeducators, we made a significant investment in them over the last 2 school years, and as a result, we are now, you know, very, very close to the median wage, as compared to where we were, which was, you know, just 3 years ago, quite far off. But as you'll notice in the regular ed paraeducator world, while we did close them to the gap a little bit because of the work that we did this year, we continue to be in a very disadvantaged position in terms of the market. Now the other, we have health assistants and LMTC assistants, library assistants. And you can kind of see where our wage ranges will be for those. And as you compare the average hourly wage, the health para, this is one that's really, really unique in that while we are not in a good position, the expectations of training that different districts have for this role really varies. For example, in Middleton Cross Plains, to be a health paraeducator or health assistant, you know, they're minimally expecting you to come in with, blanking on the name, a CNA degree or higher. And we actually don't have those requirements at all. And so some of the things, some of the reasons why you start to see folks really changing is they might get into requiring, folks to have very extensive educational backgrounds to come in to very little. And that can affect what you have to pay someone if they had to receive that, pay for that training.
So do our health paras do less than the health paras in Middleton and Cross Plains because they're less trained?
Well, that's a great question, and say the way I could answer that is that ours would be less able to perform some procedures or provide some assistive aid to individuals. Do they do less? I don't know that you could say that our paras do less. I mean, our folks do less. I mean, they're integral to our kids' support services and.
I didn't mean to say do less.
Yeah.
I just meant to say, they
Well,
can't do certain
sure,
things that the Cross Plains could do. So they're limited as to what their job can be.
Yeah,
And so you put more stress on, say, the nurses that we have in the building.
and that would be something that I would say we would want to or need to investigate further before I could give you a really good answer about that, Judy. Because part of it I would want to see, I don't have a job description. I don't know what they're asked to do in other school districts. Part of it is I don't know how they staff it. Do
Do
they?
you think our district has a need in that area? Has it been demonstrated that we need to have more qualified people?
I would say that we have high quality folks in those positions. If they had further training, could they be even more helpful? Certainly.
We've had some people with that training in those positions at other times not. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a prerequisite to get into it, but we've recruited and been able to hire some of the folks with that same credential or more.
It'd be an area worthy of further discussion, I would say, and it could be an area worthy of further discussion for sure. But, they've been in the front lines of our work to keep our buildings safe since the school year opened, undoubtedly. Yeah, so then we start to see, the library paraeducators. This is one where, interestingly enough, if you see things don't always trend up, actually in both these areas, they don't always trend up. The median wage can decrease, which it did both of these years. But unfortunately, we're trending backwards in LMTC paras. Wage ranges for crossing guards, again, there are only 3 districts that report or hire crossing guards through the district. So we can kind of see what that is. We are DeForest and Waunakee, DeForest, Waunakee, Oregon. And so we're looking there, and then this is another one. One of the challenges of Forecast 5 is that how do different districts define the same position? This is how we currently lump our technology assistants. We put them into the technology help desk technician role. It's the one that is closest, but it's not a perfect fit. And so for other districts, they have different job definitions and certainly very different wage scales than what we have. This again is another area that we're in a very disadvantaged position in terms of technology hiring. As we look at the administrative assistant job classification, there are four levels of administrative assistants, and that's kind of how I group them together. Level 1 would be administrative assistants for attendance, student and student services. And so we got middle school and high school student services. And we can again see where we are compared to our peer districts. And some of the needs that we have in terms of these areas. And in some of these roles, I did not include wage ranges because we don't have very many employees. So a wage range really is not tremendously useful to look at. But what we're looking at here again is hourly wage levels. As we look at our level 2 employees, which would be elementary principals, assistants, high school associate principal assistants, principal, and high school and middle school, you can start to see that as we look at peers, we tend to be again in several of those areas pretty favorable and again, it's this one right here. That's why I put the arrow next to it. User out.
Which one is that one? I can't read that.
So this bottom one is a middle school principal admin assistant.
Thank you.
So it's that one right there. That's why I put the arrow, but my user error, operator error as he was marking the board. You can see kind of where we lie compared to peers.
So is that based on years of experience in that position, pretty much?
Yes. So what you could run into again in some of these
If there's a
districts.
basis or the medians are pretty.
Yeah, so some of the districts, what I would say is, many of these districts don't have, are like ours, they might only have a single, a single middle school. And so if you have a single middle school, you might have had a person that's been in that position a really long time. This does not give us tenure information, this only gives us wage information. And as you look at it, even though you start to see the separation between perhaps between us and the median, if you start to look at what that is in terms of a dollar value, that is that particular dollar value can be a smaller difference than what we saw in even other hourly groups. But depending on how closely aligned all those other districts are, you start to see a greater distance in the visualization. Level 3, that would be accounts payable, student services, building and grounds, human resources, and technology. For many of these, we tend to be very close or relatively close, especially if you start to look at monetary value to the median line. And then in others that we have still a little bit of area to make up. And then this again, because we had a couple of these, we had number of employees, it could show some of that wage range information again. And then as you look at level 3 is it's our largest category of administratives. So here's these are other level 3 folks: athletics, curriculum office, technology and learning. Both these actually live in the curriculum office. They just have different titles. Student services and registrar. Again, we tend in this page to be pretty well positioned in terms of where we are at this point relative to peers. And then the final category, level 4, these are our accounting specialists, our superintendents, admin assistant, benefits, and payroll. And we again see where those different roles are compared to peers. In some areas, we are certainly better than others. In other ones, we have, again, compared to peers, some real relative weaknesses. And we start to see some of the, again, the monetary differences. You can't always gauge it by the actual distance. It depends on the role.
Because the rules vary from different districts.
Yep, so, and again, you know, we currently define all these as the same level. That does not mean that any of the peer districts do the same thing, right? So this is, all it is a like job assignment to like job assignment. Pay scale is an individual decision. And so that, you know, that's kind of our last slide in that area. And you know, I would kind of summarize and encapsulate that to say, we have done work in that area, but our work is certainly not, we're not done.
Do you have a long range outlook for how you're gonna bring people up? Have you got a plan, or how do you determine what you're gonna work on?
Well, I think what you know, what you first try to do is get a sense of the cost of that. And a little bit of that, you know, I would say we gave you a ballpark number for trying to move these to the, you know, take these numbers, median wage, you know, that was in those forecasts that we had offered to you. You know, we're talking significant expense to move everything that we just looked at. Ballpark, we're you know, 1 year, one time is about $440,000 would get everything slid to median wage. Now, the challenge with that is we're talking this year, everybody is going to be doing the same, everyone is going to be moving wages between this year and next year. And so, you know, you're like, we made up a little bit of ground last year. The target will move and it'll keep going down the road, and we have to keep going after that every year. So to your answer, Judy, would I like to have this be a dedicated area for us to continue to address? I think it has to be if we want to if we value having longevity of employment for all of our groups. How do we do that? That's a more challenging question, because that, you know, that's a significant amount of money that has to come from somewhere and is a recurring cost. That's a big question.
So,
Brian, do you mind if I jump in for a minute?
Sure.
go ahead.
Can you go back to the custodial data? So Randy and Joan will remember this, but when we were working with the HR committee years ago to first start addressing the pay gaps with the classified staff group, the custodians were viewed as an area of strength, meaning that our wages were highly competitive with the districts that we were being compared with, while paraeducators, admin assistants, and all other staff in the classified group were viewed as major weakness areas. What ended up happening is the custodial starting wage was frozen at $15 an hour for multiple years, because the initial study that we conducted actually recommended a starting wage level below 15 at a level that was underneath what we were currently paying. So the HR committee at the time kept the rates the same, did not want anyone to go backwards. But you can now see that something that was once more of a position of strength compared to our peers has changed over time. And I think there's a very valid discussion that should be had about targeted increases, especially in an area where we are not able to fill positions. And I think it makes good sense to not only study what worked, but also look and see where we've gone the other way. And custodian, just to provide some history, was once viewed as an area of strength and has completely changed. And Randy, what was that, 5 years ago at this point? when we had that initial study and then froze the starting custodial wage.
Right, yeah, because they were leading the pack. They were dollars an hour ahead. So
Yep.
we left it where it was and then just moved people based on what their annual increase is.
Yep. So that's just an example of where we were in a much better position. And because of what we ended up doing, you can see that we've now fallen behind. But the other groups, we are in a much better position today than we were 5 years ago when we did that initial study. And I think it's always important to look at the data and say, okay, what is the data telling us? And what do we need to do to respond to that to make sure that we can become competitive again? And whether it was right or wrong to freeze the 15 at that time, the HR committee and the board was in a position where we had a very extensive survey and recommendations from a consulting firm in all areas of the classified staff, and we adopted it. And I think in general, it has been very positive and successful, including leading to fully building back in a schedule of payment that Brian brought forward this fall. But just for some history on the custodians, it can go the other way, where something was once a position of strength is now has switched to where we're now behind and we are challenged to fill open positions. So that would be an area that could certainly have a valid discussion around a targeted approach to try to bring this back to an area of strength, which it was in the past. Does that make sense?
And the other piece that we've seen happen, and I mean, Steve, you and I've watched this through with the popularity of these visualization tools like Forecast 5, you're now seeing that red line. And people are chasing that red line. And so as they chase that red line keeps moving. And so
Yep, absolutely.
That's the other impact that we're starting to see. And you saw that a lot with like teacher salaries on that good fit line. Anybody below, they were raising up. And that was a strategy that several districts around us utilized in the last few years.
Yep, thank you, Brian.
And Steve, thank you for sharing that, because that's what I was gonna ask. It seems, listening, we've had a number of years that I keep hearing from custodial group how low they are compared to their peers within driving distance in the forest, low, whatever. And I just think it's imperative that we do target those groups that aren't only low, but that we're having a hard time filling the positions with them. At least anecdotally, it seems to me the starting custodian is one of those positions, and the regular para is one of those positions. And I don't know if there's plans in the budget to start targeting this year going forward, but it's, to me, that's where you got to become a priority, because we're not going to keep the people. And sitting at the, almost every month when we see a custodian leaving, it's mostly because of pay.
The other piece, I think it goes back to, Steve, if you remember, our initial comparisons were not just school comparisons, they were also looking at what was going on in the private sector. What we're pulling out here is school comparisons.
Right.
And where we look at where we're losing folks, it's not them going into a company in town, it's them going to another school district.
Right.
So that's why we started to focus in on some of the pieces that are just school related, which have some higher.
Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And one of the major issues with the custodial area is the UW system, and what they were paying was significantly below us, which dragged down the average for custodians and made it appear that our wage was really high at that time. And you can see on the slide before the one that Brian has on the screen, if you just want to go back for one more, Brian, or no, the one that had the, right, when you've got the minimum of 1551, if everybody can see where Brian has that under the custodial line, it was $15 5 or 6 years ago, when that initial study was brought forward to the board and then frozen. Because when you look at that, you would wonder, how is that not changed more than that? That's the reason why, is that that initial recommendation, as Randy pointed out, brought in other employers that were paying less than we were, which brought down the average, which made our $15 look better than it likely really was. And custodian was one of those areas that at the time QTI could compare Waunakee schools to UW-Madison and could compare us to other employers, not just looking at peer districts. And so I think you can see in the custodial area how little that has changed over the past 5 or 6 years, and why we are now running into challenges in that particular area. And it certainly is worthy of a review in and of itself. But yeah, that's why the 1551 is so close to the 15 that it was, because the recommendation back then was to basically freeze it at 15. But when you look at this data, it helps to learn what went well and what didn't go well, and then react. And obviously others kept moving their wages forward in this area, while ours were frozen at the starting rate of 15, which has really come back to now be an issue today.
You know, and I think what you know, as Steve had spoken to, not necessarily, you know, again, if you start to become more strategic with what you address, some, you know, for example, if we look at what's the greatest weakness of this particular wage range, it's the start.
Right.
Right? I mean, if you start to look at some of, you know, if you start to look at what the top end is, which is the schedule that we just completed, that is much more competitive than the start. And so you start to, you know, then you start to see what are steps that we can take, knowing that we all would love to have unlimited finances to attack these problems. And there would be nothing more than, I would love to hear from Steve than, you know, Brian, spend freely and spend quickly. But, you know, he's not delivering that message. And so, you know, to Judy's first question, how do we address, I think we start to see the tie in what areas are we having the most difficult time with, because the market is telling us something for that. We start to target, you know, a fix in those areas, but know that we can't do that at the expense of all, right? Everything's got to keep moving. If we have, you know, more favorable conditions come to us, then we water the plants that need it the most, but we got to spread the water. Water's got to go to everything in the garden. But the plants that need it the most need to get a little bit more.
Brian, have we always had 3 categories: custodian, head custodian, and maintenance, and that range? You know, it just seems like the maintenance people are not as behind as some of those other categories. You know, I know over the years, we've had people leave head custodian positions to go to maintenance, and I see why they do it. You know, has there been a review of those categories and the pay within those categories? And the history on that? I mean, I don't know if it's always been that way, or if it came out of QTI, or.
I kind of need to have Randy or Steve. I know that you know, there was a job review, like they reviewed the roles with it as part of the QTI study. I don't know how much that study went into, you know, to the keeping things separated or not.
I think what I want to do is kind of looking at different levels of responsibility and skills that were needed for each one of those. And so I think you definitely had a differentiation between a category of custodian and maintenance. And then we further created one that obviously had custodian, but then we also looked at really those that were defined in the trades, such as like an electrician. So that was one we specifically tried to address because it was outside of even what a general person was. It also gets to that we started to assign at different levels, kind of like areas of responsibility from like a grounds person to differentiation as far as what the primary responsibilities were. And then kind of helping them to either bringing in people that had that experience and then continuing to develop them in that area. So I believe when we went through this, and it was just a couple of years ago, it was trying to align some of those responsibility pieces along with the dollars.
Yeah, one of the things that seems to me is it's hard to conceptualize. I know there's a skill set for the maintenance staff that's somewhat unique from your head custodian, but then the head custodian has supervisor responsibilities that's unique onto them. When I look at the base versus the max again looks pretty reasonable. It's that base, I think, for the head that looks all the kilter. And so I don't think the whole range has to be, should necessarily be targeted, but that the starting point certainly does seem to be an issue. And there seems to be a certain level of discontent from people that talk to us.
Yes.
Yeah, and the piece that kind of ties into the budgetary side, which I know is kind of where we've also got to be looking is where are we finding those dollars, because they are continual dollars. Once you add them on there, they stay there and they move forward. So that's the other piece. And it's either you're juggling that between all your employee groups so that you funnel more dollars here, which means that potentially less goes to others. It also kind of gets into then any of the other type of budget requests that help move programmatic pieces forward. The more you do here, the less you do there. And then it gets into the larger question is, if you can't get to where you want to go here, are there pieces that you have to seek other revenue sources? Or are you reducing in some area to create more revenue?
If you had to give us a proposal for a couple different areas, what would you say to that?
I guess I would say I don't feel like I'm prepared to say which hourly. What I would say is that I do think we need to work on finding additional money to go towards our hourly employees. As a group, even the ones that are our relative strength could improve, and we certainly have some areas that we're very vulnerable. Beyond that, I want to dig a little bit more around, but kind of took up a spot on that.
Well, and I'd like to suggest that as we start looking at where we are with our facility maintenance needs, and we were looking at an operational budget that was going to help take care of operational costs in terms of the facilities themselves, but there's also potential for increasing programs that we've been waiting on. And maybe this is one more thing that we cluster into that, at least consider adding to some degree to help bring the group on. Now, other districts have done it, and it just, it's a difficult ask, I think, of the community, but maybe we have to.
One other thought and comment that has come up in some of the listening session is the paras and the difficulty of securing those employees with those small hours. I know with the marketplace, I know why we condensed down and we made one position into two. And is that still a valid? I don't know how that has all changed with different administrations, and is it still really valid that we keep those employees without benefits so that we only have those 3.5 hours? It just seems to me for the good of the kids and the position and hiring, that looking at more full days instead of those half-day positions may be beneficial.
And I would say, I think again, in general, I would say the majority of our regular paraeducators tend to be probably more 5 to 5.75 hour employees more than their half days. The challenge is if that addition of 3 hours or actually once you go above 6 hours, you're really eligible for health insurance. Comes, makes a significant increase. You're minimally looking at probably increasing it by $7,000 per position if you make that move to go above 6 hours. And so that would be again something that I would not be prepared to say, hey, what's the, what would the change, what would we gain in terms of coverage versus the expense? How much more would it cost us to do? I'm not prepared to answer that. I mean, I certainly could. That's numbers that could be crunched. What I would say is I don't know how effective that would perhaps be, because we have again, it is different work, but there is in-district comparison where we have special education paraeducators that have a higher wage scale, have access to healthcare, and we also have challenges filling those roles. And so part of the challenge that we will always have is that our community is expensive to live in, which makes folks that can afford to live here generally are not working off of an hourly wage. And so, and we don't live, and the difference between Madison, Sun Prairie, Middleton, Verona, Waunakee is that the mass transit supports 3 of those districts and doesn't connect to ours. And so that changes, now you've got to have a mobile workforce and an able workforce, which is challenging. It's an interesting question. I don't know that there is a clean answer to would it make a difference or would it not. I don't know.
One of the things to think about too, John, is it doesn't move that far. It changes the dynamic as far as you're paying more for a position, somebody's working more, it's kind of more of a fuller time job with the benefits. It adds the cost to it, but we're not touching the wage. We're adding a benefit to it. And I mean, you're still going to be in that competitive market there. And I think that's the piece that Brian's speaking to, is where even the special ed folks who we have on more fuller time positions, because of the consistency with some of the one-on-one aids we have with kids, we still have a hard time finding them. So that's part of it all fits into kind of where do we want those dollars to go. And that's the biggest challenge, is that we don't have enough disposable dollars to play with to be able to do all the salary pieces the way we want to do them, the benefit pieces maybe the way you want to provide them, and the programmatic growth that comes along with being really a progressive district. Those are our challenges.
All right, well, good stuff. Thank you for providing that. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay, teacher compensation committee update.
Sure. I've given everyone a one-page kind of update on where we're at with that. We continue to press forward with the work in this area. As we built it, we tried. There were many aspects of it that we feel are serving the district well, that serve staff well. So we did not believe as a committee that scrapping it was the best outcome for anyone. But we did have some areas that we felt we needed to address. And so in some respects, I would call it a rebuild or a remodel, a remodel as opposed to new construction. And so some things look very similar. Points continue to have the same value. The reason for that is the one challenge that we recognize is that as a district, there's really only one avenue for us to start to address the points bank. And that is, again, a larger question. It's not going to be able to be absorbed by our operational budget. And so we have to build a new system that has the ability to blend old with new. And prior points were valued at $3. If we continue to value points at $3, folks can use old points, if you would, in a new system and not have there be a disjoint financially. And I don't think anyone intends or hopes that or believes that we should have and totally empty out the points bank, because there's a benefit to employees to having some points available to them. Is there a benefit to us and to them at shrinking that bank? Yes, there is. But there always would be some interplay, old to new. So we kept the value the same. We continue to keep the way that the system kind of operates in general similar, in that annually salary increases are related to experience, but instead of having, well, I'll get to that again. We set a cash value to a year of experience as opposed to allowing points for it. But it's experience, professional development, and a negotiated CPI amount, which is similar to what we do now. And I'll kind of address the differences as we get to the next section. And the other idea is that the base salary has to continue to increase. The base salary would continue to do that by whatever, again, current model that we use. We negotiate CPI, we evenly distribute it across the teaching group, and we raise the base by that much. We would continue to do that based on how negotiations went. That would change the base in future years. What's different? There won't be steps in the schedule. There will be a base wage. Individuals will move at almost an individual pace with limits. A year of experience would remain consistent teacher to teacher. Their professional development points would be paid as they are earned, up to a max of $750. And so if a teacher wants to pursue the max amount in a given year, they would go out and earn 25 hours of professional development. They would be paid $750 then in an increase. If a different teacher only could have pursued 10 hours of professional development, they would be paid out for that $100 raise. There is no minimum needed. So unlike what we have now, which is you have to get 500 if you want to be eligible for a compensation increase, now it would be what amount you earn is how much the system would pay, up to a max. As I mentioned, the year of experience is a flat $400 amount. That was kind of a blend of the way our system currently operates, which is depending on where you're at in your teaching tenure, a year of experience is worth more when you're young or new in teaching, and less when you're older and more experienced in teaching, more experienced, not older. Our wage system has nothing to do with age. It's about it. But again, that was the blend in between there. Moving forward, points would only be earned for professional development. And we did a little bit of clarifying language on what those things are to update it to what's really going on in the world, but those are not new necessarily concepts, they're just an adjustment to what's current. We did to make it a little bit easier, an easier calculation, more clarity within the system. Points it's now $10 per hour for professional development, 150 points per credit. As I had mentioned before, it's that there's a max in what someone could earn in terms of dollars per year for professional development. Something that is also different is that the new plan has the ability for a teacher to access their banked points based on their years of tenure, based upon year of hire. So if someone sticks with us every 5 years, we would allow them, if they have a points bank available to them, to double move in 1 year. So if I have gone above and beyond in earning my professional development, I'm going to have a bank of points that I've not cashed in every year. At a 5-year interval based upon my hire, I can take some of those points and advance, instead of $750, I could advance $1,500. It's very, very predictable for us to see what that would be. It would be very possible for us to budget for that. It also would start to chip away at the points bank, which we thought would be, a good thing for us to try to do. And then I think the other fundamentally different thing that is that when we bring teachers in, we feel mentoring is important. It's required if they're new to the profession, but we feel it's important even if they're an experienced teacher coming into our district. So we would assign professional development points to those activities, and that would allow those, again, in a time of transition or a new career for folks, a time for them to acknowledge they're being developed by a mentor or by work with a mentor. But it would not cover all of their professional development needs, but it would cover a chunk of them so that there would be balance between, we want them to continue learning, but we want them to also recognize that they need to focus on their classroom in the time of transition. And so in general, that would be my one pager about where we're at right now. Questions, certainly could take any questions. I know the two of you have lived in the system, so you probably.
It's great. I mean, it really, it's such a great blend from where we were to a very predictable budgetary move. It really, I give that group a lot of credit for blending the two systems together and making it seems like it's much more affordable, and they get to use what they have. And so is this how they will be compensated next year?
That's a great question, and what I would say is in the goals of the committee, we would like to see the new system put, actually that's what we have been working on, is with that in mind, that we would be in a position that the board could take an action on it over the summer for next school year. What I would say is that we still have work to do as a committee, and certainly one huge part of that is we need to take this out to the teaching
Right.
staff as a whole, educate them about what the proposal is, get their feedback about how they feel about it, and see. And certainly, taking that feedback and feedback that would come from the board and seeing if the two can meet. I do, Randy and I actually had this exact conversation today. I think it is ambitious, but possible to do that.
So when you look at like implementation, that would be rolling out the system so everybody knew what the new game plan was. And then it would get implemented as part of the budget for 22-23.
So put it out for,
Right.
start paying on it.
You wouldn't
next
start
school year.
paying on it until after they've actually been working in it for a year. So as we're doing pay for next year, it's not under this system.
Yeah, thank you, yeah, that, because again, as we have talked, like staff have been told, use the old, use the old rules, if you would, or current rules to prepare for next year.
Right.
But as you put the system into place, so again, we would pay off of what we've done, and then we would be building off what's in the current.
Just early, this is very attractive, a couple questions. One, it looks, so is there a limit as to how many points you can get for professional development in 1 year? It looks to me like with the cap, you're looking at 2 credits. So if I'm working on an advanced degree, what happens to those those credits once I hit that 750 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Do I store them or are they just gone?
Yeah, we did not put a maximum amount that someone could earn in a year. We did not change that, because that was not something that existed in the other system. We did not add one. What the folks would still, and again, that's another reason why we kept the value of full 2 points the same, is because if someone does go get more than 250 points, they need to go store, they'd be stored somewhere, they would go into a bank. But hopefully, the idea is if the system operates kind of as we would design, people would not have banks that would keep going. They would go, we knock them down,
Right.
in much more sustainable fashion, because there's benefit to someone to having a security blanket of some
Sure.
points.
And so would the concept of the 1,500 points, whatever it was for a master's, is that out the window then, that kind of thing?
No, so, well,
Are those
what-
pieces still part of it?
those pieces are still part. Again, what we had, and that would be, I think, that's one of the items that's really still in discussion with the committee.
Okay.
And so, I think it's absolutely fair to say is that there is still going to be an assigned value to achieving an advanced degree or certificate.
Okay.
What we do with them and how we might pay them out, we're still coming to an agreement about what we're comfortable with.
And then do you see, if from a HR perspective, placing new experienced teachers into this, is it any more complicated than it is the current system? To me, I'm thinking it probably won't be, but
Actually, I think it would be more straightforward in that currently we have, when I hire someone in, I'm taking a look at their years of experience, and if I'm trying to equate them to what we do, certain years are valued at this many points, other years are valued at this many points.
Right.
And then I'm taking a look at seeing what do they have for advanced degrees, et cetera. Our new system would have a value for a year of experience. Our new system would have a value for an advanced degree. Our new system, would have a value for professional development. So the formula would work new to us or existing. And that's, again, one of the things that we would certainly want to communicate to the teaching staff as a whole is how can we keep it consistent? When we bring people in, we have internal equity that we're concerned about. We also have, as a system, need to be thinking about external equity. How do we go against the Farlands and Middletons and et cetera? So manageable both sides.
great.
Great work. There's one more item, and I know there's a 6 o'clock meeting, so I don't know how much discussion you want on this spring, summer compensation increase.
Yeah, well, and we've had the conversation, I think, numerous times. I think part of what I would bring up is that I think there's some real merit to the system. And when I say the system, to those that deliver it and to those that receive it, to have it set going into the first round of paychecks. And so we've all heard the feedback of how the teaching staff would like to know what they're making before the school year begins. You know, the other employee groups have communicated, you know, they would rather have their money in hand rather than have it, you know, delayed to them. And so what that would mean, obviously, is if we're looking at again, our 12-month employees, you know, their first paychecks come July 15th. You know, what we're really looking at then is, you know, information going to the board for a decision, or a first view in May, a final decision in June. And then, you know, then our teaching group there could be a bit of a delay because their first paychecks don't come in until September, August, the end of August or September. And so, you know, you could push that back one meeting each, you know, June, July, if you need to with teachers. But, you know, that's kind of what the decision was in. As we've also talked about, it would require us to be conservative. And I would say there's an opportunity for us if we are, again, if we take a conservative view at it, if we undershoot because maybe our enrollment numbers are more favorable, our state budget is more favorable, there is opportunities to revisit that decision and still provide additional compensation to employee groups later. And you can do that in a few different ways, but, you know, everyone needs, you know, they have heard, you know, that if we do negotiate earlier than a fall negotiation or a set the wages for other group, the offer would be more conservative. There's also, I would say, some safety for the district in that if we overshoot, you know, even within a conservative estimate, there are some, you know, we have some safety mechanisms this particular year that could protect us. In terms of we're going to have, you know, budget money carried. No, we obviously don't want to do that, but that is a safety net that could protect us a little bit. So it's something that I know we had discussions about. We also talked a bit about it at the budget committee. It's, you know, I guess something that if we want to move that direction, we need to keep the discussion going.
Brian, do you mind if I jump in for a minute?
Anytime, Steve. I appreciate you asking, but you know, we'd love to hear from you.
Joan, you were on the HR committee 2 years ago, correct?
Correct.
So I don't know if you remember, this was one of the first meetings that Brian came to after he was given the position of the HR director. And we were in the back of the room and I was writing on the whiteboard a same discussion about paying hourly wage increases as of July 1st because of the compensation system that we put in place, and that we were going to be paying classified staff folks the wrong rates from July 1st until the pay raises were determined in the fall. The board at that time was concerned about having different dates for when pay increases would be implemented. And we worked through that a couple of years ago because of the fact that we were paying classified staff members on what I would call as a old school approach to making payments to folks, which was annualizing their pay. Brian and his team have been working through a very long approach to modernize the payroll system, which is going to result in everybody switching over to a true time hourly reporting system for everyone after July 1st. And it's really important that we pay people the right wage on the new schedule that we created last fall, even if it means a wage increase effective immediately on July 15th. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is people are going to look at their handbook. They're going to look at the schedule that Brian put together that the board approved last fall, and they're going to know right away they're not being paid that. And they're going to be getting paid through the use of the true time system. And we really need to convert them to the schedule that was put together last fall is really a core piece of modernizing our payroll system. And I believe the two go hand in hand. And I would be more than happy to work with Brian on bringing something back to the next committee meeting to really allow us to make that point when we have a little bit more time and we could present something to you as far as a concept for, again, it's July 15th. It doesn't have to be everybody. It just has to be the 12-month folks who would start getting their pay after July 1st using the true time system, and making sure that they're getting paid the right hourly wage according to the new system. Because if you remember 2 years ago, Joan, we switched to allowing folks an anniversary date pay increase.
Right.
So when they were moving from year 1 to year 5 in the system that we had 2 years ago, year 5 got them to average. People were having birthdays anniversary dates for their employment with us, like in March, and were completely missing out on that pay increase. So we switched it to reward their year of service with calculating that pay increase at that time, but it had to be built into this annualized pay concept. Moving to true time and paying folks based on their true hourly wage after July 1st is really the best approach for us to take in the way that Brian is modernizing the way that we're paying folks through the payroll system, which has really been a goal of his since he started the job. And I guess I'm asking for this committee to be willing to look at what Brian and I could work together to put in front of you at the next meeting, so you could see an actual example of what that looks like. And then we could present to you concepts for like July 15th that you could review. I think the staff that would be under this system would greatly appreciate it. And to be honest with you, it would make so much more sense to them to be able to look at their handbook, look at the schedule that Brian brought forward, and they will understand why their paychecks are what they are, because it won't be based on an annualized pay system, which is more hypothetical, versus a true time system, which is more actual. And I know there's another meeting coming up, but I just wanted to put that out there that I think it's the right thing to do, and would love the opportunity to work with Brian to bring something back to this committee to look at.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So I know we have another HR scheduled. Yep, sounds perfect.
Have you worked through the month that there initially wasn't gonna be a paycheck for hourly? Have you worked through that?
Yeah, we're going to be communicating to staff in May what options are for them if they do not want that to occur.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
Okay.
there will not be a pay gap forced upon anyone. They will have an option.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much for all the information and work with
Thanks, Brian.
that.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve.